Good to go?
I think we are good to go.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. It's 8:30. We will call this meeting to order. And Mark is going to help us with introductions.
All right, let's start with City of Olympia
Good morning, everybody. Danny Madron with the Olympia City Council.
and City of Lacey,
Robin Vasquez, City of Lacey.
Thurston County,
Carolina Mejia, Thurston County.
and Rainier,
McVeigh, City of Rainier.
and Tenino.
John O'Callahan, representing the great city of Tenino, center of the known universe.
And the Squally Indian Tribe.
Hello, Dave Alf and the Squally Tribe and the Thurston Conservation District.
Good morning. And let's go North Thurston Public Schools. Esperanza, if you introduce yourself, you are muted. Did you fall off? Oh no, she's there. Okay. Well, we'll come back. City of Yelm.
Morning, Joe DePeno.
And Olympia School District.
Good morning, Hillary Seidel, Olympia School Board of Directors.
Inner City Transit.
Debbie Sullivan. I'm doing both Intercity Transit and the City of Tumwater today. I'm doing double duty.
Oh, okay. Great. Thank you. Okay. Lot Clean Water Alliance.
Hi, this is Carolyn Cox representing Lot.
And Port of Olympia.
Amy Harding, Port of Olympia. Good morning.
And Thurston PUD.
Chris Stearns, Thurston PUD.
And Thurston Conservation District, David Isle also representing. Evergreen.
Scott Morgan with the Evergreen State College.
And Thurston EDC.
Good morning, Michael Cade.
And I'm scanning to see if I've missed anyone who came in. Okay, I think that is everyone. And Chair, if you'd like, Katrina Van Every can help us with the introductions of staff.
That would be great. Thanks, Katrina.
Good morning. From TRPC, in addition to Mark Daly, we have Allison Osterberg, myself, Dorinda Merrill, Berlina Lucas, Michael Mills, Max Franklin, Tyson Justice, and Amy Hatch-Winnica. From Intercity Transit, we have Peter Stackpole and Emily Bergkamp. From Thurston County, Becky Kahn. From the City of Lacey, Martin Hoppy. And from the City of Tumwater, Mary Heather Ames. And I'm just doing a quick scan, and I have one more popped in, Veronica Jarvis from TRPC as well.
Great. Thanks, Katrina. And since I've got the gavel today, I'll just take the opportunity to say I so appreciate the staff of TRPC and how well run these meetings are and the materials being sent out and the follow-up. It's very well run, so thank you all. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, John O'Callahan.
Second, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
So moved
Robin.
by John O'Callahan and seconded by Danny Madrone. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of approving the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand or waving or doing something cool.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, we have an agenda. Consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved, John O'Callahan.
Is there a second?
Second. Carolina.
Moved by John O'Callahan, seconded by Carolina Mejia. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent calendar as presented, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand or both.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? Great, consent calendar is approved. And we are moving on to our public comment period. I don't believe we have any public comment. Has that changed?
No one has signed up, Chair.
Okay. We welcome all public comment for anyone who's listening. So next time, hope to hear from you. We will now move on to our Thurston County Industrial Land Study.
So as folks pull up the presentation, just as a little bit of introduction, we heard some public comment on this at our last meeting, and fortunately, we already had this scheduled, and so it'll be really good to get this update on what Thurston County's accomplished on this industrial land study. So thank you so much, Ashley and all, for joining and helping us better understand what has occurred.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I am Ashley Rye, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Community Planning Manager over at Thurston County, and I oversee the Long Range Planning Group, as well as all of our conservation programs and our water and hazard data services. What you probably didn't hear in there was economic development. We are not economic development experts, and so as we want to run through the overview of the industrial land study, we are happy to take questions and research those and get back to you. And I know Michael Cade is on the line, and so we might just turn to him if there are questions that we can't address about sort of the regional economics. So it's going to be me, and then Andrew, if you could turn on your camera and introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Andrew Bond with Community Planning.
And if you want to go ahead and bring the presentation up, I'm actually at the start of my spring break with my family, so I'm coming to you from a hotel in Portland. And so if for some reason I drop off, Andrew will go ahead and carry on the presentation. So yeah, so we are here to chat with you, provide a high-level overview of the Thurston County Industrial Land Study. Next slide, please. We'll go through background, an overview of the study, and this really is going to be a high-level overview. It's a pretty hefty document full of fun, wonky charts and tables, and then we'll highlight what the study findings are and those key takeaways. Next, please. So I think the big question is, why did Thurston County even take on this endeavor? Over at the county, we saw pretty much an unprecedented number of industrial rezoning requests over the last 6 years. And not just small ones, like 20-acre rezoning requests, think in the hundreds of acres in terms of what those requests look like. And so as our planning commission was looking at these requests, they were like, well, what do we have in terms of data to, inform these policy decisions? And they recommended to the Board of County Commissioners that maybe we should get an industrial land study done. Take a look at what land is available in the county, what our different employment trends are shaping up to be, and seeing if we do indeed need to identify additional lands for industrial development. The Board of County Commissioners thankfully docketed that, and we went ahead and contracted with Mall Foster Alongi in 2023 to complete that study. That study was wrapped up in December of last year, and is a snapshot in time. So any numbers I use here are really just at a point in time representation of what our industrial lands inventory looks like. And of course, this is a living and breathing thing, along with most other planning efforts that we do here in the region. Next slide, please. So the scope of the study, we didn't just focus on the county, either UGA or rural unincorporated areas. We looked at everything from the cities all the way, down to, Tenino, Yelm, Grand Mound, UGA. What you'll find in that study, if you want to go digging, are employment projections for a number of different industries, a representation of the built industrial space broken out by those buckets of cities, UGAs, rural areas. There's even we'll give you a little preview at the end, but there's an awesome appendix that displays all this on a map. And then, of course, looking at what kind of industrial land we have remaining for development, looking out to 2045. Next slide. So the methodology that was used for the study was working backwards from industrial employment growth trends. And we essentially asked the consultant to look at 4 different forecast scenarios. And those are just a mix of Low, medium, or high growth of manufacturing, juxtaposed with growth in the transportation warehouse sectors. And so those are essentially the two major growth sectors that they identified. And so those four scenarios just sort of break out, like, what if more growth was in warehouse transportation versus manufacturing. And then it looked at the land need forecast based on those employment needs. And then land inventory broken out by developed, underutilized, and or developable. Next slide. So what it found was that based on those different scenarios, the industrial square footage that would be needed out to 2045 could range anywhere from 16 million to 23.3 million square feet. If you translate that to acres, it essentially calculates out to around 1,200 acres to 1,800 acres that would be needed out to 2045. It is important to note that as they were doing this study, they were trying to capture as much as they could. And they did find that there's about 3 million square feet of industrial space and 250 acres of industrial land in the pipeline for development. That's that snapshot piece. Like that number may have decreased and or increased since the time that they did this study. So how do you figure out what your developable land inventory is? It's really an exercise in subtraction. So you look at all the land that's zoned for industrial uses, and then you basically whittle it down to what of those lands has already been developed, what of those lands are underutilized, what of those lands are covered in critical areas or under public ownership and probably never being developed for industrial purposes. And the result essentially ends up being that inventory of land that could be developed for industrial uses. Next slide, please. So as they went through that whole subtraction exercise, what they found was there's about 1,900 acres available countywide. But as you start digging into what that acreage looks like, only 1,100 acres of it is utility ready or only in need of one primary utility. Of course, there's some constants for all industrial developments in terms of what their needs are, and utilities are one of them. You're not going to find many industrial developments that don't need utilities access to the site. The other piece that the study spent a lot of time doing was breaking out the industrial land inventory we have here in the county into size buckets, because you don't build warehouses on 5-acre parcels, you build warehouses on very large parcels. And so it's not enough to just say you've got 1,900 acres. Well, how is that broken up? So the numbers here reflect just UGA and rural Thurston County, but it isn't that much different even if you look at the more urban areas. So in that 40-acre parcel bucket, or the kinds of parcels or areas that are in common ownership for warehouse distribution, there is 0 currently in the rural Thurston County. There are about, I think it's 3 that are in incorporated areas. So for the whole county, we've got 3 big sites left for warehouse distribution. And they could have constraints on them. I don't think they all have utilities. And I think some of them are impacted by habitat for endangered species. So there may be a path forward to development, but it might not be an easy path. We of course have more acreage available in that 20 to 39 acre bucket of parcel sizes. And then most of the land that we have readily available. Oh, and I'm sorry, these are still like UGA and rural Thurston County, are going to be in those smaller parcel sizes. But even for the whole region, we have a lot more parcels in those smaller 20 to 39 acre, 1 to 19 acre parcel size buckets. Next slide, please. So key takeaways: total acres needed, that 1,200 to 1,800 acre range. The study found that we do have about 1,900 acres, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. So only 58% of that developable acreage is utility ready or in need of minimum utility investment. And there's definitely more developable acreage available in those smaller parcel sizes. And then try to keep it brief, high level, and happy to try to dive into areas of interest for you all.
Thanks, Ashley. Let's go ahead and take questions. If you want to raise your hand, if you have any questions. Carolina?
Not really a question, but more of a comment and a moment of pride. Just great job, Ashley and Andrew, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Carolina. Danny?
Hi, Ashley. Good to see you. I've got a question that maybe you're probably going to expect from me, but in looking at the lands available to be developed, were you also looking at like prime soils, agricultural lands that could potentially be developed into agriculture? I'm sorry, into industrial.
Nope, this focused only on lands that are currently zoned for industrial, not lands that could be zoned for industrial.
Oh, okay, I see. So it was just looking at lands currently zoned for industrial and not, so in the context of like rezoning requests, then you were just looking to see like, as the Planning Commission is considering rezoning requests, is there already enough industrial lands out there okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
John?
Okay. One of the things that caught my interest was you said there's about 6 times the amount of rezoning that was going on. Out of what we apparently have left, what is the average size of industrial person that is looking for land in Thurston County?
So that is where I might need to lean on Michael Cade at EDC to sort of do that matchmaking. So this study looked at sort of the land base in terms of, what kind of industrial users are looking to come to Thurston County. This study didn't necessarily explore that. They look more at, growth trends
Just
across
flat
the state.
out land.
Yeah, well, and I don't know, Michael, if you have any comments on that in terms of what folks are looking for here in Thurston County.
I think I would answer that question in a different way. Ashley and John, one of the things that we've noticed is that one of the slides that you showed up there was the availability of the 0 to 40 acres. That's really kind of the sweet spot a lot of times. And John, what we're noticing is that as we're kind of becoming more known for opportunities, a lot of sites users will go elsewhere. And so if that opportunity doesn't really exist, they'll just go elsewhere. So it doesn't really show up on our screen. So what I'm saying is that a lot of times that inventory that you're looking for is what people are looking for. It doesn't show up here, not on my screen. It might show up on a real estate broker's because they're looking at a kind of a continuous region between Lewis County and Pierce County. But in Thurston County, sometimes that doesn't even show up on we don't have an opportunity to respond because they go elsewhere. So it's not really it's not really an apples to apples question in my mind. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you, but typically we do see, if I have to answer the question, give you a number, is that we do see between 5 and 25 and 25 to 30 acres is that sweet spot that we're starting to see right now.
Okay.
And I can comment on it from a broker's perspective because I do industrial brokerage. The 40+ acre people are looking between Seattle and Portland, and there's a limited number of sites available, a half a dozen in that entire range of space. And that's based on how consumers are purchasing their goods and the need for larger facilities to process them. And then 5 to 20 acres being a regional development type size, and sub 5 acres, it's really not practical for most industrial.
And one last question is how accessible are these properties to the I-5 corridor?
Amy, you might want to answer that question. I mean, that's really a good question because you can't just have a piece of property and say, okay, this is marketable. It does need to have infrastructure. It does need to have access to market. It does need to have access to transportation. So really, that's the nuanced piece of that question. But maybe, Amy, you could give a better answer than I am on that.
from a brokerage perspective, the closer to I-5, the better, and that's based on the cost to the user from a community perspective and an environmental perspective. We don't want trucks driving 10 miles off of I-5 past our schools, past our houses. So as we're looking at this, I think that the lens of proximity to I-5 is really important. As we're looking to meet the needs of the community. And I believe, and I'm not an expert in this land study, but I believe that it showed that a lot of the lands are significant distance from I-5. Is that correct, Ashley?
Yeah, I would say if you look at the maps and the distribution of where industrial land is, I mean, there's some key sites. Those ones over 40 acres are right along the I-5 corridor. As you get to the smaller parcel size, they're more distributed. And that's where, I mean, if you look at anything in this study, what appendix is it, Andrew, that all the maps are in? That's probably the most interesting one. You can just flip through and get this visual, a great visual representation of where the sites are, what the size of them are, and whether they're utility ready or not.
So we start in Appendix A, which goes into the square footage, and then B has the industrial zoned acreage per jurisdiction. And then Appendix C has the public ownership parcels, and that shows kind of the underdeveloped vacant land and the acreage associated with that.
And that's where I think, as we're having these conversations about community planning, continuing to have private sector representation in these conversations, because they might be able to bring up these kinds of things. It's not just market driven, it's environmental impact that maybe we don't think about when we're thinking about meeting the needs of the community. But for those of us that live and breathe it, continuing to incorporate that in the conversation, it can be really helpful. Hillary?
Yeah, thank you. And I this might have been in the full document, and apologies if I missed it. I was actually a little bit curious more about the request for rezoning, and so maybe you can't speak to that, but curious about whether like what types of lands were the rezoning requests asked about, and where in the county those were located. So did you notice any patterns about certain types of lands that were a request to rezone to industrial, and were there particular areas in the county where those requests were coming in from more frequently?
Yeah, I would say and it's all public information. They're projects that were considered for our docket. And so I would say two of the big ones are Maytown, the Maytown exit, which doesn't have access to utilities right now, but obviously is, has an exit off of I-5. So two of the big ones were in that area. A little bit further afield, in Little Rock, Grand Mound, sort of in the Grand Mound area, even south of Grand Mound, but all along the I-5 corridor. We currently have standards in place that only allow warehouse distribution if you're within a half mile of an I-5 interchange. And so there have also been requests to relax that, to allow warehouse distribution further away from the I-5 corridor. So those are all things that our Planning Commission and our Board of County Commissioners, need to consider as they're making these policy decisions.
And apologies, what are those lands? What are those lands currently zoned for? I just don't have it up in front of me.
Oh yeah, rural resource, residential.
Chris?
Yeah, I just want to comment about the resources that Amy mentioned regarding the environmental impacts. Groundwater is our sole source of drinking water, and it, as a resource, thins out as you go south in the county towards Lewis County. Also, rainfall diminishes in our county as you go eastwards towards Yelm. So the fact that the west side of the county recharges faster than the east side of the county, because we get more rainfall out here, and that the South County has a limited amount of resource because the geology just doesn't have aquifers as large as the North County. So that has to be plugged into it. The county and TRPC has overlays of where our water systems are and what are available in the county. But, the sure water is certainly inside the cities where they already have planned ahead to provide things. It's very difficult to obtain water rights outside city limits these days. And I've told you guys this many a time regarding schools, so you know about it.
Thanks, Chris. I don't see any other hands. I'll just put a bow on it with City of Seattle did some long-term planning to protect industrial lands. And one of the things that the messaging that they used was industrial lands are kind of like the laundry room of your house. And when someone comes over, you're not like, hey, look at my laundry room. But if you don't have a laundry room, your house can't function. And so I think that these industrial projects, nobody really loves warehouses. They're not housing anyone. They're not a park that we can enjoy, but they are meeting our basic needs of how consumers are purchasing goods, whether it's food, whether it's Home Depot, all of the above. And so if we just continue to remind ourselves that if we have to have adequate industrial lands to meet the needs of our community, just like we need other essential services, and finding the best spot for them so that we can minimize the environmental impact, the community impact, but recognizing that not having them is not a good option, just the same as a house without a laundry room. So thank you, Andrew and Ashley. We really appreciate it. We're ahead of schedule. Woohoo! I love that. And we will move on to legislative session recap. Mr. Daly.
Thank you very much. Are you hearing me? Okay, good. Thank you. I'll kick it off, but Veronica Jarvis, who is our lead for legislative coordination, will do most of the speaking. But I'll just kind of preface it with, for a non-budget year, for a supplemental budget year, it was a pretty darn busy legislative session. There was a lot of stuff passed. There was actually a lot of budget changes made, and so it was an important one to be staying on top of, and we've got some interesting things to tell you about that happened this session. So, Veronica.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I think I have someone bringing up some slides for us. Hopefully, thanks, Dorinda. Lovely. Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. And I think most of you know me, but just in case you don't, Veronica Jarvis, and I've been with TRPC for a few years doing the Commute Trip Reduction Program, but also taking on some legislative work this last year. And I think I'll mention this at the end, but Mark and I are just sort of seeing how to dial in our legislative process. And so we're certainly open to feedback on how you'd like to see things look differently in the future. And I put links all throughout the presentation if you want, but please just give us your feedback. Feel free to reach out in any way to either of us. So I think you'll remember from the beginning of the session that we had 3 top priorities, and then we had sort of a host of other goals and focus areas just in case there was something we needed to weigh in on. And we had you all approve that just so we could be a little more nimble and flexible as we were talking to legislators and depending on what came up throughout the session. So really our top priority for the region is to continue the work on I-5 through the Nisqually Delta. And as you can see here that it all worked out and we had to do some interesting budget tracking of how things appeared in the 2 different budgets, and ended up making sure that all the roundabout projects that are going to support the I-5 work did get their adequate funding, and thanks to our regional legislative delegation for that work, because sometimes those budget things are a lot to align and make sure you're putting things in the right years and right places, and it all worked out. And I think our local legislative coalition that we went to visit with the legislators on, they all did a great job of sort of explaining the importance of those roundabouts and the Nisqually Delta project to our region. So again, shout out to the legislative subcommittee.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that briefly because it was a really great outcome on this is because when the first versions of the budget came out, the House had this funding $4.5 million for the Vale 507 roundabout, and the Senate did not. But even in the House side, it took money from the $75 million from Move Ahead Washington and just kind of took it from the out years to put it towards the roundabout. And it was a great outcome that in the end, they didn't do it that way. In the conference budget, they added $4.5 million to the overall Move Ahead Washington project. So it's now $79.5 million, which was fantastic. So not only are we whole for that roundabout, we didn't lose any of the funding to do the design work for the Nisqually River Delta.
Yeah, I don't think there were a lot of people getting like a funding adjustment or increased funding this year. So I would say we were really fortunate to make sure that that appeared as we think it should in the budget for the future. So our next priority was trying to get additional funding for MPO statewide. And while we did have some really great conversations with legislators about this, I think everyone's feeling was, let's take a look at it next year when there's a biennial budget where we're considering increases like this. And I think, Mark can speak more to this, but, some of his peers across the state with other MPOs, really, this was one we were trying to help lift up for the smaller MPOs because we have a diversification of funding with a lot of our different grants, but other MPOs don't have that ability. And so trying to make it so we can level the playing field a little bit. But I think that next year will be a great time to focus on that one more, but good conversations. And then additionally with the MPO eligibility for regional mobility grants, that's something we talked to you about earlier this year, that this was language that's in the budget that we would love to see codified for the future, that metropolitan planning organizations are able to apply for regional mobility grants. Right now, it's really just local governments and transit agencies. And as you all know, we have such a regional lens, and the connectivity between regions is something we think about and talk about all the time. So really getting us the ability to apply for this funding into the future will be hopefully something we can talk about next year. But they really did want to do a grant cycle, which TRPC already did one pre-application for a high school TDM project. And we'll see how things go. And I think they kind of wanted to let a grant cycle go by. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, Mark.
Oh no, just
sorry.
You're good.
Veronica, are you open to taking questions during the presentation? Chair Vasquez has her hand raised, or would you rather wait until the end?
I'm fine. Yeah, let's go for it.
Chair.
Just a quick question to make sure I'm reading that right. Did legislators tell us that they wanted to see if we would apply for grants before putting it in writing that we were eligible to apply for grants?
So this is a good question, Robin, and I maybe I could have clarified it more, is that what we have now is temporary budget language that says that for this time period, which is the 23-25 budget cycle, we can apply for these. But when something's in the budget, it expires at the end of the budget. So they're sort of, before they wanted to put it into law, they were like, oh, let's see if the MPOs actually care if they're able to apply for these. So great question. And so this is the cycle that we're applying. And then they kind of wanted to see if there is interest, if there's reason to take it a step further.
Permanent.
Yes, make the eligibility.
Oh, okay.
And one other point on that, just to note, is there also was with this change, there was some concern by some of the transit providers that opening it to metropolitan planning organizations could create too much competition for those dollars that oftentimes go to transit agencies. And so the legislature also wanted to kind of test that concern through this 2-year pilot.
Yeah. And one of the things there is, yes, it is a certain level of a pot of money, and it is spreading the peanut butter around, as they say. But with a lot of the grants that we apply for, they're pretty low dollar in comparison to what the transit agencies and things like that are applying for. And they can help us really have that vision for regions. that we all know is so important because transit agencies have the constraints of really having to sort of stick within their boundaries. And I mean, this is all, no surprise to anyone here. And as much as they're trying to think regionally, that, it's something the MPOs get to think about a little more in depth, and having even just a few $100,000 of planning money can mean a lot to us. But so we don't see it as a big threat to them, but we'll figure it out in the future. Next slide, please.
Real quick, Danny has her hand up.
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, I figured since you took one question, you could maybe take another. My question was actually around the additional funding for MPOs statewide. And my understanding is that there's like a flat level of funding that is distributed among MPOs year after year after year that has not increased. And the request is to bump that up, like doing a one-time bump up. But have there been any conversations around building in a percentage increase each year? Because, you can advocate for that one-time bump up to meet the current need. But then, in a few years, you're going to have to make that request again because demands go up for MPO. So is it about a one-time bump up in the level of funding, or is there more conversation around percentage-based increases year by year?
And just to make sure, so when we say one time in the budget, we truly mean one biennium. So we would want something, and this is what we asked for this time, was to have an ongoing increase in the whole pot statewide. So we were requesting hey, now we get 5 million per biennium for the whole state. We would like 12 million per biennium for the whole state ongoing. That's what we were requesting. And we did talk to some folks about, hey, could we see that indexed to something, inflation, something like that? And we have had those conversations, and we're sort of trying to look for other examples of that. I think it doesn't happen very often. And the legislature will probably even put this on themselves that often they don't factor in inflation until much after the fact. But it's something that happens, and trying to put those sort of mechanisms into laws is a great idea, but those are tough to get in there because it does make the dollar amounts change every year, which causes more budget work. And I'm going too deep, but I understand what you're saying. And yes, we were trying to get that ongoing increase, but also maybe tie it to inflation or something like that.
Right, thank you. You're right. Inflation happens. It
does happen. Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, so I will continue, and please give me a holler if there are questions. I'm on an iPad, so it's hard to see when there's people that have their hands up. But I'm going to kind of cruise through these bills to note that passed, and maybe I'll at least get through this page, and then if there are questions, feel free. But what Mark and I did was really just try and call out things that we thought would touch us in some way, shape, or form, or some of our members. There's so many bills that pass, and there's so many things to talk about. I could give you, an hour presentation on the budget, but here are the things that we thought were interesting and would affect our region. So we had, and as I said, in this presentation, there's links to everything. So you can go and take a look. And if you have any questions, please reach out, and we're happy to help you try and interpret things. So 2296 was the extension of the comp plan deadline for the regions that are planning in this comp plan cycle. And so they did a similar thing the last cycle. And so now instead of July, we have December. So the challenge there is that they haven't extended the funding. If any of our smaller jurisdictions that might be relying pretty heavily on commerce grants for this, since we're in the middle of a budget cycle, they can't extend the funding until the 2025 session. And it would be probably just a 6-month extension of funding if people aren't able to spend it. So that's a possibility, but for now, I think having the deadline, getting folks another 6 months never hurts. So 6015 is concerning residential parking configurations. This one is really, they're trying to have us think more about what qualifies as parking. Is it, a gravel spot? Does it have to be a garage? So I encourage you, if this is something that affects your area region, to take a look at this one, because it could have some changes for you. And I might, if Mark has more to weigh in here on 6140, this was my first introduction to a LAMIRD, a limited area of more intensive rural development. And I think other people know more about this than me, but I could tell it was probably important. And this is allowing for increased commercial and retail service flexibility in those type 1 LAMIRDs that have been part of a county planning under UGA since that inception. For our rural communities, could be something that would change some of their opportunities. The 6120, the Wildland Urban Interface Code delay. This one also is just speaking to like some of our wildfire lands and looking at those risks. DNR is going to put together like a state risk map. So also important for some of our rural communities. And yeah, I think another one to really look more at if you feel it's something that might affect your area. 6283 is the Sandy Williams Connecting Communities program. That's extending that group who looks at some of the grant opportunities for the areas that were bifurcated by state highways and making sure that there are active transportation routes to help those vulnerable communities. 2380.
I'll just.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Debbie has her hand up.
Yeah, so sorry, I have mild laryngitis today. So for 6120, the urban land, so it's a delay because this really affects our urban forestry plans because of the setbacks. So we're trying to do our urban forestry and our tree ordinances. So is this going to be looked at again, or because it was really problematic in our area?
Ooh, I'll have to get some more information on that because I read all these bills and I don't have them all memorized, and so I'll get back to you on that, Debbie, because I think that's something that I probably need to give you better information on.
Well, and I'll just say that was the basis of this bill. I know that Tumwater had concerns about the new code and how it interacts with other requirements like housing and such. And that was what what precipitated this bill. And so because they heard those kinds of concerns statewide. And so that is part of what they'll be looking at, is they're doing the delay to kind of look in a little more depth to what was passed.
And I'll check in with staff because they probably have good information also.
And I'll also just add really quick on the Sandy Williams Connecting Communities program. That was an important one to us because that is the program. It's a new program, and it's what is funding the Martin Way pedestrian crossings work. And so we have been a direct beneficiary of that new program. So great to see that they're going to extend it.
Yeah. So next one is 2384, which and this was pretty strongly supported in both houses, the traffic safety camera bill. And this it expanded the places where we can use traffic safety cameras. And this was a huge one. The traffic safety cameras have been allowed for a few years, but one of the challenges was that all the footage had to be reviewed by like a commissioned officer. And rightfully so. I think a lot of jurisdictions were prioritizing commissioned officers to go and do the great work in our communities and not review footage on a camera. So this allows for civil service staff and public works staff and all sorts of other people to take a look and be able to have jurisdictions give out those tickets for speeding. And this is a really important one because, we have a traffic safety crisis across our nation, and any tools in the toolbox we can get is great. And, we've tried really hard in our communities to do our best with education and things like that. And this is another great option for our communities. So really want to point that one out because it did change a lot of places you can use them, and then the distribution of the fee also. So next one here is the curb grants for rural and tribal development. This was I think that's right, I had a note here that this was something, and this is, I wanted to point this out, that this is codifying something that has been in the budget before, allowing opportunities for grants for rural and tribal broadband. And this is what the type of model we'd want to see for regional mobility grants, is like something that's been in the budget and is clearly working and popular. We'd want to do a grant to make it ongoing, the grant program ongoing. So this is the kind of thing we'd like to see. Next one is 60/40 prompt payment for public works subcontractors. And again, this is an area I don't know enough about personally, but I know that a lot of our regions have public works contracts, and the subcontractors was what they were focusing on here, because I know that they're having some issues with getting those to the subcontractors right away. And especially when there's a DBE, a disadvantaged business enterprise involved. We're trying to get those subs their money as soon as possible so they can continue to thrive in the construction industry. The last one here is urban growth areas, net zero swaps during when regions are doing their annual comp plan amendment review, allowing for net zero land swaps out of their urban growth areas. So next slide, please. Sorry, we have a few more things to go through. And this feels a little bit like rapid fire, but I do want to remind you everything is linked, and please ask us if you have more questions. And then I wanted to point out that the EDC had a successful session with some great bills that'll help them do their work. 1870 allows for some matching funds for applications for federal funding. That's such a challenge to many of us that try and get federal or state funds like that, just having those matching funds available. So this created allowed for a new pot of money there. And then 6173, allowing for the existing local option sales tax for affordable housing in projects that serve 80% of AMI if it's for owner occupancy only. So allowing, there were so many bills that passed on housing, I think. That's probably where Mark and I both started to get overwhelmed. It's like, what do we want to tell you about all there were bills that passed, there was so much discussion, there was so much in the budget. If you ever want to dive deep into the commerce budget and learn more about what's going on in housing, definitely take a look, but it's so broad, and there's so many things to discuss. So it's always hard to decide what to tell you about. But last one here is House Bill 1998 that allows co-living housing. This was one that was discussed a lot this year on residential zone for multifamily. So just really, they're trying to increase all the different types of flexibility for land use that we can, so we can get more housing built, which continues to be one of the goals of the legislature. Next slide, please. And the budget is my bread and butter, and so I have to bring out what I thought was interesting to see in there. And this is another place where I'll note that if you ever are looking for something in the budget, or you're having trouble trying to understand it, or you don't know where a certain document is, I would love to help you. I think it's confusing even after working in it for many years. And I think that sometimes you need to know what to ask for or where to find something. So I really would be pleased to help anyone look for something in the budget.
And I'm just going to put a plug in here because I used to think I was pretty handy with the state budget. Veronica is really handy with the state budgets. And so please take her up on that offer if you ever have any questions. She has shown me things that I didn't know existed in the budget and tools to use. So great resource.
Yeah, so happy to do that. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the funding for the roundabouts and I-5 were maintained, one of our huge priorities. Something I think we talked to you about last, it came in at the biennial budget, was a van pool subsidy for state employees. And this is a statewide benefit. And they weren't sure, they gave it some money in the beginning of the budget, and they weren't sure if they could cover the whole state. They weren't sure if they would be able to provide a full subsidy. But now they adjusted the amount. They've dialed in some of their projections a little on how many people might use this benefit, and they are able to provide 100% subsidy for van pools. And if that sounds foreign to you, you know, I work in transportation demand management and commute trip reduction, so this is something I talk about every day. But that basically means any state employee can get a van pool for free to work all the time. And for this pilot period, So a lot of people, transit isn't a great option. Maybe they don't have a safe walking or biking route, but a van pool can be a really great option for those that just live just far enough away that they couldn't find another way there. And it's a great shared ride option. It's really expanding the utilization of our road system. So I'm a huge proponent, and I'm really excited to start publicizing this through our commuter production program. Again, one that if you have any questions about how that's going to operate, let me know. 120 million in additional greenhouse gas emissions reduction funding. And so as part of this, there was in the budget, just generally, there were so many places where if that climate commitment funding is maintained, i.e. if we get to keep it after January 1st from the initiative that is in the fall, there's a lot of places where we'll see some huge increases in grant opportunities in our vulnerable communities, in our tribal communities, in our rural communities for greenhouse gas emission activities, whether that be electrifying things, boat programs that you can convert to an electric boat. There were so many cool things that will hopefully happen if we see that funding maintained. And then as Mark and I mentioned that just so much housing affordability and housing work that's going on primarily through the Department of Commerce. So another place, if you want to dive into it more, please take a look at the Commerce budget and let me know if you need help. But a lot of good potentials in the budget if that funding maintains. So next slide, please. And I wanted to just sort of put some notes here for a reminder that this is our first year, Karen Parkhurst did a lot of this work for many years, and we want to serve you, our members, in the best way we can. And we were just trying things out this year, trying our best to do what you are interested in, but we'd love to hear if you want us to focus on more or less same next year, we'd love to hear it. And trying to stay ahead of things is the best we can. Mark and we're really trying to just do everything as early as we could this year, but it always never feels early enough. So yeah, with that, I'm happy to take any more questions. But again, please provide your feedback to us.
Chris. And then Robin. Chris, did you put your hand down?
No, I'm up. I just wanted to ask about 1181 House Bill, I believe it was. It's the one that's funding all the initiatives, the 10 million that you almost got to there in your list to provide studies regarding climate change and stuff that are these new requirements that the legislature put on municipalities. And I haven't heard any mention of that yet. So I'd sort of like to hear what's going on with that. And just, you went over LAMRIDs. We have several LAMRIDs in this county, limited rural areas that have somewhat urban growth. Rochester, Grand Mound, Little Rock, and Maytown, as well as Boston Harbor and Steamboat Island Interchange. There are several places that are not towns, that are not incorporated in this county, and they represent a quandary as to how to get services to them.
So I'll take the question on House Bill 1181 because that was a bill from the 2023 legislative session that passed. And so there wasn't any new legislation that adjusted the requirements under 1181. And so that is a big one for our area because for those that don't know, that bill was related to climate and the Growth Management Act. And it's the bill that includes a new climate element that's required in comprehensive plans and a number of other things. And Thurston County, being in the 2025 batch of comprehensive plan updates, we are part of that first batch that needs to incorporate all the changes from House Bill 1181. And so what I would say, Chris, is there was a lot of discussion about, because there's a lot of change. There's a lot of new work and new elements that need to go into comp plans. There was a lot of discussion about it because it's going to be challenging, but I am not aware of any bills that passed that changed 1181. But I see that Chair Vasquez has her hand up, and maybe I'm wrong about that.
She had it up.
No, it's not about
that. Okay.
Yeah, and also just Chris, just to mention on your comment about landlords, and I totally understand this, and that's why we mentioned that bill, is just knowing that our rural communities sometimes don't have also the tools they need to provide services for their community members. So trying to track those things that will help rural folks. So
Yeah, I fully understand this because we operate in the county. We don't operate in cities.
Yeah.
And so we provide water service to rural areas, including other counties around us. But I'll tell you one thing, this is a burden to county government. You're depending on a suburban base in the North County to pay for South County services.
Thanks, Chris.
Robin?
I'm keeping my camera off because my internet at this Best Western that I'm in Kennewick has somewhat unreliable internet. But I just wanted to share, Veronica, that I'm very excited about the Vanpool 100% funding. And
Yeah.
as somebody who's in charge of this at a state agency, Jeff and I have already been talking about how we're going to broadcast this and make sure
Yeah.
people know that Vanpool is an opportunity, and figuring out whether we can continue to subsidize it as an agency while the state is covering the cost of operating a Vanpool to like sort of double incentivize people who do come into our building to take Vanpool. So we're already having conversations about it, and I just wanted to share we are very excited.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Yes, I've been dying to publicize it for months, and they were still working things out with labor relations, OFM, everything. And I was just dying to tell everyone about it. And there are so many options with Vanpool. They have a daily option. If they're really supporting a lot of those state hybrid workers that come in once, twice a week, once every couple of weeks, things like that. They let you do a daily option. So always here to plug the great services of Inner City Transit, and they do such an excellent job. I'm so excited to have this option in our community.
Yeah, I was going to
Hillary?
say we're very lucky to have Inner City Transit as a part of this program.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Hillary?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, this is less of a question and more of like we're heading in the right direction. I had the kind of privilege of tagging along for a few visits this session, and I just wanted to express my enthusiasm for the approach y'all are taking. And one of the things I appreciated in particular, because, you know, I represent this weird entity of schools, which is so integrated into everything our communities are about, but we're not doing a lot of the planning and the transportation projects. I really appreciated the way that you all were engaging with our legislative leaders to think about our communities as like wholly integrated systems, and that these little things like the MPO, increased funding, that those impact all of these other issues that they're hearing about from other organizations and groups, and that working through MPOs is a way to sort of like bring all of those concerns together around community design that's really sustainable and connected. So I think you're heading in the right direction, and I just wanted to sort of let folks know that those were some of the conversations we were having that I personally felt like were gaining some traction with leaders and felt really productive. So good job, guys.
Thank you. Yes. And I think I thought I had it on my slides, and maybe I just missed talking about it. We were so happy for those that showed up for those legislative meetings. And our subcommittee was awesome and a great sounding board for us. And really, it was a neat opportunity to have, you know, all of our members share their stories and how regional planning benefits them, how they can talk about what they need from the region and from our local legislators, and just a really great time to connect. So if this is like my plug of you should join us next year. You should though. It's fun.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Appreciate all that info and all your work on it. We know it happens year round, but a little bit of a sprint here. So
yeah.
And we're right on time again. Unified Planning Work Program, Katrina.
Good morning, everyone. So this is going to be our first review of the Unified Planning Work Program. This is a document, if you'll remember, to your review that Mark gave last month or the month before that, that this is one of those things that you're going to see every year. And so just as a refresher, as TRPC has 3 designations. One is as a state regional transportation planning organization. One is as a federal metropolitan planning organization. And the third, which is new as of last year, we are also a transportation management area. And so when you look at all these requirements or these designations, there are requirements that we need to do as a RTPO, MPO, and TMA that are pretty much in common. And that's that first bulk of items that you see here. As an RTPO, we also have additional requirements that only apply to that designation. So there are a few things that we do, such as the Coordinated Public Transportation Human Services Transportation Plan, that just we have to do because we are an RTPO. There are additional requirements that we have to do as an MPO and a TMA. One of those things is an annual self-certification. We do this as part of our RTIP update, annual update. And then the last piece, which is the newest piece, is we have some additional requirements as a TMA. So the big story is, as an MPO, RTPO, and a TMA, TRPC has a lot of responsibilities and a lot of work to do. And one of those pieces is the Unified Planning Work Program. So this is a required document that describes how federal and state funds will be used for transportation planning purposes. So again, as the MPO, the TMA, and the RTPO for the Thurston region, TRPC receives funds that are intended to help ensure continuous, cooperative, and comprehensive regional transportation planning process. So both federal and state laws govern how these funds can be used and reported. And the Unified Planning Work Program pulls it all together and talks about it. The other thing to note is that while it's very much centric to us as an agency, it is a unified planning work program. So it is looking at all the transportation work, planning work that people are doing in our region. And so when you look at our Unified Planning Work Program, UPWP, it's made up of 4 pieces. TRPC's work program, STBG program planning studies. So these are studies and planning efforts that are funded through federal dollars, other planning activities that occur in the region, and also some unfunded needs that we've identified. So let's just take a look at what our work program is. As an agency, TRPC's work program is divided into 6 elements. Program management, this is probably where a lot of you will see and have contact with staff, because this is what helps us staff the TPB, our council, and our TAC meetings. So if you're contacting and reaching out to any staff as part of that effort, we're looking at that as program management. It's also what helps us maintain our staffing levels and make sure that people are trained appropriately. The work that Mark does, all of that is part of our program management. Second piece is our project programming and tracking. So this is probably something that your jurisdiction staff is going to be in contact with us more about. So when we look at the RTIP amendments and reaching out and working with the jurisdictions, when we pull those documents together, when we go through the call for projects process and develop that and are working with the TAC members on that, that's part of that. But we also have performance measures that we talk about. So you'll see it in regard to that as well. Ongoing planning and outreach. If there's something that doesn't quite fit with all the other things that we do as an agency, This is probably where it is. So if we are working with your jurisdiction on a transportation issue, but it's not necessarily part of a specific project, or you just need assistance in doing some of the planning work that you've identified, need someone to sit on a review panel or something like that, that would be something that we would build to that work element. Data collection, analysis, and forecasting. This is where a lot of good pieces of work live. So we've got a modeling team that does a lot of work for us internally, but also works with your jurisdictions. So that's a piece of it. A lot of the data that we see online is paid for through regional council and the dues that you pay, but some of it is also fed through our data collection, analysis, and forecasting work element. The fifth one is our major initiatives. And so these are the big pieces of planning work that we're doing during the state fiscal year. And then the last piece is contingency and carryover. Hopefully we don't dip into this, but the contingency and carryover is just a pot of funding that we hold in reserve. One, because it's earmarked for the next state fiscal year, and two, because we need to be able to respond when there are changes in funding levels, or if there is new work that we haven't really identified. So this is where we would utilize those funds. So those major initiatives that we're going to be working on this next state fiscal year is updating the regional travel demand models. This is work that we've been working on for the last few years. And this will continue. The second one is updating the regional transportation plan. So another piece that we have is our carrying forward. Our regional transportation plan is due in July of next year. So this will be a big undertaking, or is a big undertaking. And then the third piece is establishing a congestion management process. So as a transportation management area, our new federal designation, this is one of those pieces of work that we need to develop. We're knee deep in it right now, have had a lot of meetings with TAC members to talk about what this should look like. And you'll hear more about this in the coming months. Next up, our STBG program planning studies. So these are, again, studies that are funded through the STBG dollars that we get through the federal government. So some of the work that we're doing right now is the high capacity transportation study. So remember, we got some state funds, but it originally started with some federal funds. And so that's what's still here. So Veronica Jarvis is leading that effort. Emergency Incident Management Detour Route Improvement Study. So this is work that we're knee deep in again, and this is really looking at what happens if I-5 is not functioning the way it needs to because of an emergency situation. What do our detour routes look like? How can we improve them and make them function better so it doesn't overwhelm our community? Bicycle connectivity strategy. So this is one of those projects that we received redistributed funds for, and those funds happen to be STBG dollars. But that's something that we are kicking off this year. Freight mobility strategy, and regional multimodal level of service are also those two other projects that were funded with those redistributed funds. So again, a lot of great work right now happening, funded through the federal government. Next up, we have other planning activities. So as I mentioned, the UPWP is not just about what TRPC does, but it's also about what's happening in our community, in our region that everyone else is working on with regard to planning. So commute trip reduction, Martin Way crossing strategy, a transportation safety action plan, rural transit, stormwater road retrofit study, VMT work or reduction work program. All of these are things that TRPC is working on, but we also have things that intercity transit is planning and working on. We also have things that our WashDOT headquarters is working on, and also Olympic region. So we take a look at all those, and those are included in the UPWP as well. So last piece is the unfunded needs. And if you don't remember, this is a really important piece to our UPWP because it's identifying the things that we know we need to address and we don't have the funding to do right now. And so it sets the bench or sets the program for us looking forward to other funding sources, trying to find it out or trying to find additional funding to do this work. So we started out with 7 unfunded needs, and that's what's reflected in the draft that has been provided for you with the packet. But there are 4 others that have been identified since that staff report and that draft UPWP was submitted. These came 3 from our WashDOT review meeting that happened last week. It was a suggestion from our partners at WashDOT Public Transit. And then the 4th one is an addition, an ad asked from Thurston County. So after our TAC meeting the previous week, this is one of the things that came up as maybe we should add this in. So let's take a look at these. Access to big data is becoming a more critical component to transportation planning, and an assurance of its presence as we work on transportation projects will improve the durability, usability, and longevity of this work. Right now, we are looking at our access to big data sunsetting at the end of June. It's just simply we don't have the budget to handle the cost at this stage. So this project would result in 5 years of access to a big data source to support current and future transportation work. Next up, neighborhood center study. This is a long-standing unfunded need. It's a priority goal of Sustainable Thurston to create vibrant centers, corridors, and neighborhoods while accommodating growth. So improvements to our federal call for projects strategy and process in 2022 highlighted a need to align jurisdictional definitions and requirements for designating and maintaining those neighborhood centers. In investments, policymakers seek to support not just urban corridors and centers, but also neighborhood centers and need greater consistency. So this would fund that work to really understand what do we mean by neighborhood centers and how do we make it consistent across the region so that everyone's talking the same language. Multimodal level service phase 2. So phase 1's been funded again through those redistributed funds, and the products from that are a multimodal level of service best practices and options report. We'll be drafting recommendations for preferred next steps, identifying proposed revisions to the regional transportation plan, and identifying proposed revisions to the call for projects process, as well as developing a policy toolkit for local jurisdictions on applying multimodal level of service and transportation programs. Phase 2 of this is really looking at the adoption and implementation of a regional multimodal level of service. With all the work that we are doing in phase 1, what should a regional multimodal level of service look like? Is it appropriate? How would it be implemented? So regional carbon reduction strategy. This is a project that we tried to get funding for last year. It didn't work out, and that's okay because there's plenty of work to do and lots to go around. But with all the climate work that we've been doing, with all the legislation at the state level and the federal level that has been coming through, really honing in and developing that regional carbon reduction strategy will help us be more strategic about projects that we prioritize that come through TRPC. Regional Trails Work Program, as you know, we just finished at the end of last year our Regional Trails Plan. And there's a lot of energy and hope around this to really improve our trail system. And so this Trails Work Program looks at the 3 things that TRPC has been called on to do and looks at funding it for 5 years. Pedestrian walkability strategy. So when you look at the work that we're doing around multimodal and active transportation work, this is the piece that maybe is missing. So identifying what are the needs of pedestrians, where are the gaps, and all that information that goes along with that will help us set a strategy for how to improve the network and make walking and active transportation more critical, not critical, but just more part of our daily lives. Next up, transportation resiliency strategy. So our region is vulnerable to lots of different hazards. And so this is just taking a look at what happens if something breaks our transportation system. How do we respond to it, but also how can we be prepared for it to make our system more resilient? Next up are these rural transit options. So these are 3 projects that public transportation at WashDOT suggested we add to the UPWP. That's a route deviation policy. So this is a project that we've identified needing for RT so that we understand who is able to take advantage of the route deviation that we do for RT. So basically, RT will go off its route to pick up someone if they're within a certain distance of that route. But if you have too many of those route deviations, it can really impact the timeliness of that service. So how do we develop a policy that addresses the balance between those two things? The transit signage and flag down training. Again, this is a piece where we've started, have been able in the last few years to put up some RT signs for bus stops, but there's still a lot of places where those signs are not available. And it makes the stops where people can access RT a little hard to see and know. So that's part one, is really just adding the signage to that. The other half of this is flag down training. So RT really does rely on knowing that someone needs to be picked up. So if someone is at a stop, how do they make sure that the bus knows that they need them to stop and make sure that they can get that service? The third piece is vehicle replacement discussions. So we have been working with WashDOT over the last few months on an issue with regard to vehicle replacement. And so this was just not an identified need when we got funding for RT. And so this is just trying to balance out the need or to cover that shortfall that we've identified. The last piece is regional trails crossing signage standards. So this was an unfunded need that Thurston County identified. Our region has a lot of at-grade crossings of our trail system and roads, and the signage at them for both the pedestrians or users of the trail system and vehicles is maybe not consistent. So what would that consistency look like? How can we implement something so that the communication for both types of users is clear? So that's a lot. We've got 11 unfunded needs, and that maybe sounds worrying, but this is actually a good thing, because when we're able to identify the things coming down the pipeline that we need to address, it makes it a lot easier for us to look for the funding to do that. So think of this as our next steps list of things that we're looking for funding for. I also just kind of want to orient us back to TRPC's strategic plan. So this graphic might look familiar. The idea is that we are planning for all current and future residents, looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging through these 5 lenses. And when you look at those unfunded needs that I just talked about, you can parse them out a whole bunch of different ways, but really they are part and parcel of our strategic plan, is try to fill those gaps that maybe we have right now and make sure that we can move our region forward. So this is kind of the schedule for the update or the adoption of the UPWP. Again, this is something that we are tasked with doing on an annual basis. On March 21st, we met with TAC. Again, bubbling out of that conversation is where we got a new unfunded need for trail crossings. March 28th, we met with WashDOT staff, as well as FHW, Federal Highways Administration staff, and Federal Transit Administration staff, and talked about the UPWP. So state and federal partners provided a number of suggested edits to our UPWP draft. And these are not yet reflected there. So this includes including a table of federal planning factors and the associated tasks in the UPWP, including a table of other planning efforts led by TRPC, how they are funded, and any required match associated with them, including anticipated consolidated planning grant requests. So those 3 RT requests in the unfunded needs section. So again, those weren't reflected in the draft that you have before you, but we will include those. And then structuring the sections discussion about intercity transit planning activities and rural transit in a similar manner. IT and rural transit have a lot of similar requirements, so talking about them in a similar way helps communicate all the things that they do with regard to planning for our region. There are other minor corrections and edits that were also suggested. And the thing that I want to note here is that none of these changes requested impact the overall budget of the UPWP. So that's not changing, but some of the information we're going to be adding a little bit more to it. So with that, we have today your first review. We'll be going to TPB next week for their recommendation. And this will return to you for council action in May. And then July 1st is when the UPWP would go into effect. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Katrina. Danny.
Yeah, thank you, Katrina. I have a couple questions around the unfunded needs. And one is when the regional trails plan was adopted, there was a recommendation from the Transportation Policy Board around funding the needs to that through a set aside. So is that still on the table?
So that's part of the conversation that you'll be having regarding the call for projects, I think next month. But yes, so Paul Brewster has been crafting a process that looks at having a set aside for trail maintenance. And so that's the set aside that the call for projects is looking to include.
Okay, thank you. And then one other question. So we had WashDOT request that we add some things to the work program. Is there state funding for those items they asked us to add that it would be available for us? Because adding things from having the state ask us to add things and then adding them to an unfunded needs list doesn't actually get them done. So I'm just curious if there are state funding opportunities to do the things that they'd like us to do.
So I want to make sure I understand your question correctly. So when you look at the things that they've asked us to add into the UPWP, part of our budget that we get from the feds and the state as a RTPO, TMA, MPO does fund us to develop the UPWP. That's the funding that we're using. So the changes that they're asking for are, I would say, pretty minor. It just takes a little bit more effort. If you're talking about the unfunded needs list and the things that they're suggesting us add to it, yes, there is funding available for that. So there's a consolidated planning grant program for transit that they're rolling out this year. And this will actually come back to TRPC for consideration at a future date. But those 3 requests that we added for RT, they will be looking at requesting the funding through that consolidated planning grant program.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Carolina.
Thank you. Kind of similar, on a similar vein. I'm wondering, right, how was the unfunded needs list prioritized? And is the TAC going to be utilized to prioritize any of those needs?
Yeah, so I would say first off, the unfunded needs list is not a prioritized list, as in like this is the #1 thing we're going to go for, because we don't know where the funding is going to come from. So anything that we can work on, we will do. When we're developing the unfunded needs list, we look at previous versions of the UPWP to see what is still unfunded, if the need is still there, and how so it's added to it. Internally, TRPC staff looks at all the work that we do as an agency and look at the work that our partner agencies and jurisdictions are working on and try to identify what other unfunded needs there might be. The third piece of that is that we do go to our TAC members and talk about the unfunded needs list. And so again, that's where you saw another project being added that's based off of the conversation that I've had with Thurston County staff. So when we look at the unfunded needs list, what I would say is if you're seeing something that you feel should be or is a priority for our region that we missed, absolutely speak up and let us know, because it's not too much work to just add another unfunded need to the list. It also helps us, again, prioritize what as an agency we're looking for, or the funding opportunities that we're looking for and how we can meet them.
Chair Evans, can I do a follow-up?
Please do.
Thank you for that. So since you requested some examples for Thurston County, the one of them that I did not see on that unfunded needs project list was the trail crossings on roadways and streets. Just have a great deal of liability, associated with them, and just a regional study to develop an inventory and guide consistent system for safety improvements, I think it needs to be on the list.
Yeah.
So that's I guess one of the requests for Thurston County.
Yeah, absolutely. And just based on my conversations with Becky Kahn, we are adding that as an unfunded need to the list. So that will be included in the final draft that comes before you in May.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Katrina? Okay, we're going to go to our break and we're going to come back at 10:01. See you in a few. Hello, everybody. It's 10. We're going to start again in about 1 minute. All right, it's 10:01. Welcome back, everybody. We are moving on to our regional transportation plan climate change updates. It looks like we've got Mark and Katrina.
Yes, so I'll be taking this one. So at the February meeting, when I talked to council and went over kind of that orientation, one of the pieces that is our part of our regular cycle is our regional transportation plan. And we do an update to that plan every 5 years. And it's one of our primary responsibilities under our transportation side of things. It is that plan for the county and all our jurisdictions. What are we working towards, and what do we expect to see in our region, and how it relates to how we're moving people and goods throughout the region. And we've got our update coming up it'll be due July of 2025. And so we're starting that. Well, we've already started that work. And what we committed to you a while back is that we'll bring this to you in pieces, because this is such an important document for us, and because it's a pretty dense piece of work. We'll kind of keep bringing it to you in chunks, so it's a little less to digest at the end when we're looking to adopt a updated regional transportation plan. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So the kind of things that I'm hoping folks will take away from today's presentation. Oops, I'm not in presentation mode. Sorry about that. The thing that I am hoping folks will take away from this is just give everybody, since this is our first piece that we're bringing on the update, that people get a kind of reoriented with what's in the regional transportation plan. And then specifically what we're talking about today are the areas of integration with the thirst and climate mitigation and adaptation plans and the regional transportation plan. And then also, one thing that I definitely want people to take away from this is there is so much going on in this space at the state and federal level around climate planning integration, that yes, there's going to be a lot of improvement and update in this, but it's still going to be a work in process. There are a lot of moving pieces. And so this will be an area that we'll continue to emphasize and make progress on in the next update, and probably the update after that. So just a little bit of a orientation to what you're seeing is the cover of our current plan. What we're working on now is an update that'll say what moves you regional transportation plan 2050. And so again, it's our 20 to 25 year plan for what we are looking for in our transportation system. And after all the introductory material, it's got a chapter on recommendations. And these are recommendations at a high level, but also then tied to all the individual regionally significant projects that are identified in the appendices. It's got a chapter on our guiding principles, our goals and policies. So the framework that we're working within in terms of what we are wanting our transportation system to look like and how it functions for our region. Our last update was the first, really the first in the state to include a Washington State Department of Transportation Facilities chapter. And that was a chapter that we worked with Olympic Region on last time to complete and get into the plan. And we're planning to do the same thing this year, rather than just have the WSDOT projects be something we kind of staple to the back of the plan. Really, we can't look at our county and city facilities in absence of those state facilities. And so that integration was a really nice improvement last time that we want to continue. It looks at future conditions, and this really depends a lot on the transportation modeling that we talked to you about, looking out to that year 2050 and how do we expect the system to function, and how the kinds of projects that we're including in the plan impact that function. There's a finance chapter. If you've been around for a while, you will have heard Katrina and others talk about fiscal constraint. It is our responsibility to have a plan that we have reasonable belief. We have reason to think that the funding is going to be there for that project. And if we can't identify the funding, for the potential funding for that, then it shouldn't be in this plan, or it can't be, because we have to show a fiscally constrained plan. And that chapter is how we do that. And then finally, environmental considerations. With our current system and with the things planned, how will that impact environmental conditions in our region? And so the recommendations chapter, this is one of the places that we're looking for to make some changes to improve climate integration into this plan. So currently in the recommendations chapter, it calls out kind of two main areas. An emphasis on maintenance and preservation. So this is something very important to our plan. The highest priority is really preserving the investments we've already made, making sure that we're keeping our pavement in good condition, making sure that we are adequately providing public transportation so that we're meeting the needs of all users in our region, and the efficiency of the transportation system. And this is an important one that's evolving, because the focus on this used to be a lot around congestion. And now this is more about making sure that all the modes, that transit, that vehicles, pedestrians and bicycles, that together they're working as a system that are efficiently moving people and goods. And then all of the regional projects. Again, those are projects like capacity that'll add some sort of functionality to the system. And again, multimodal, so that can be transit, pedestrian, bicycle, new connections and alignments, trail projects that are identified, public transportation projects and studies, WSDOT projects and studies, and then that last one, studies, is really just about kind of the regional studies that we have identified. Kind of think about the unfunded needs that Katrina just talked about. Those are some of the things that we'll be looking to highlight in the regional transportation plan as well. And then what we're proposing, and would love to get some council feedback on this, is adding climate mitigation and transportation system resiliency as one of these kind of three primary pieces in that recommendations chapter. So we're focused on maintenance and preservation, we're focused on those regional projects, and we're focused on climate mitigation and transportation system resiliency. So that is not the current plan. This is what we're proposing for the update. We're going through the plan from front to back and looking for all the places where we can highlight the work that our region is doing, is planning to do, or needs to do around reducing greenhouse gas emissions and making sure we have a resilient transportation system. And so in that recommendations chapter, this is really straight from the beginning of it, where it lays out our vision of aiming to develop a system that's safe, efficient, affordable, while supporting land use plans and long-term quality of life objectives. And then it lays out these principles. And the very first principle is that it's sustainable. And so what you see in that bold italics is what we're proposing to add to this is a specific add to sustainable that talks about fostering actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provide for a transportation system resilient to the impacts of a changing climate. So that is right up front as one of the principles of our regional transportation plan. We're also looking at the goals. There are 20 goal areas in the plan, and we're going through all of those and including language related to climate where it's applicable to those goal areas. But one of the things is that we don't have one of those 20 isn't specific to climate, to greenhouse gas reduction or adaptation or resiliency. The closest that we have is this goal area 18, environmental and human health. And that is where we see things like promoting use of alternative fuels, where we see supporting policies and actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then that 18I, which is about that adapting to the changes that we already expect to see. So making sure we have a resilient system. And one of the things that I would love to get some feedback on is what we're thinking about as staff is to kind of rework this goal area 18 to make it even more apparent that this is where we're focusing on climate adaptation, climate mitigation, transportation system resiliency. So we would be changing this goal area to better reflect that, and would love to get council feedback on that. In the future conditions chapter, that is another area where we've got quite a few updates because there was a new greenhouse gas emissions report that was done by TRPC, updating up to through 2021. There's likely going to be another update not done by TRPC before July 2025. And so depending on when that gets done, we might be updating this again to use those numbers. But if we don't see that update done timely, then we'll use this 2021 where we see that transportation is still the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions at about 36%. And also we'd be including this information because it is certainly noteworthy that between 2015 and 2021, we saw a reduction in transportation greenhouse gas emissions by 8.8%. Not surprising to everyone, a lot of that is due to the reductions in driving during the pandemic. And so we are seeing these numbers on the rise again. So that would be one of the areas where particularly it would be useful to get another update to the greenhouse gas emissions inventory to see if how we're seeing those changes potentially in the transportation sector emissions. Also in the future conditions chapter, we'll be updating the targets to reflect the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan targets that were also updated and adopted by council that use a baseline of 2015. And we're looking for a 45% reduction of those 2015 emissions by 2030. And we're looking for an 85% reduction in those 2015 emissions by 2050. So incorporating that into the plan. This is an area where there's a lot of work going on right now. So there's a little bit of uncertainty here, and that is on vehicle miles traveled. So we've got Sustainable Thurston target, it established a target of by 1990 reducing emissions by 30% or 25% by 2035 and 50% by 2050 for per capita vehicle miles traveled. And with that baseline of 1990, we see that during the pandemic, we actually achieved that 2035 target. But it's noteworthy that the state is using a different base for that per capita vehicle miles traveled. And our climate mitigation plan uses a bit of a different metric for vehicle miles traveled. So what you're seeing here is still that sustainable Thurston target, just kind of extrapolated out to population. But it's noteworthy that the climate mitigation plan uses total annual vehicle miles traveled and a base year of 2015. So it's quite a bit different. The staff recommendation is for the regional transportation plan that we continue to use this per capita vehicle miles traveled target. We may need to update that in the future which I'll talk about. But the reason we're thinking it would be best to stay with per capita vehicle miles traveled is because that is what the state has used and has codified in a number of places, including the Growth Management Act. And it's what the federal government is using and has codified in several places in transportation law. And so for that consistency, we think it would be best to keep our target tied to that per capita vehicle miles traveled. So then in the environmental considerations chapter, there'll be a lot of updates. Where we'll dig a little deeper into the impacts of the transportation system on some of the changes that we already expect to see in our region and one we're already seeing, like the frequency and intensity of precipitation events increasing, sea level rise, and other extreme weather events, both heat and flooding and the like. The role of transportation electrification and alternative fuels in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Further emphasizing land use policies that support urban density and transportation efficiency. More information on the benefits of increased transit use and active transportation, biking, walking, and other forms. And a big one is how the increase of telework has impacted the transportation system and vehicle miles traveled. And then again, that emphasis on transportation system resiliency and hazard mitigation so that we're really preparing for the kinds of changes that we're already seeing in the environment and how they potentially impact the transportation system. What I talked about in terms of this is going to be a work in progress because there is so much going on. In 2021, there was a state proviso that called on Washington State Department of Transportation to lay out a process for coming up with regional vehicle miles traveled targets statewide. And the final report from that proviso came out in June of 2023. It didn't quite lay out that process for setting of regional vehicle miles traveled, but it's something that WashDOT is still working on and considering potential administrative code or legislative changes on how we need to consider vehicle miles traveled going forward. So that's something that is not going to be figured out before our update is due. And so it's one that we'll continue watching. It will likely evolve in the 2030 update and beyond. was already mentioned. House Bill 1181 was already mentioned in this meeting. That Growth Management Act change and that added a climate element to comprehensive plans. And like I mentioned at that time, Thurston County and our cities are the first round of those comp plan updates that need to have this element included. And it includes both a resilience element, which is about goals and policies to improve our preparedness, our response to effects of climate change, and the greenhouse gas emissions, how those comprehensive plans are working towards our greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled targets. There's also in the 2023 changes to the Growth Management Act, it made a number of changes where it says that transportation planning needs to be based on a multimodal level of service. Well, as you know, we've been talking about this for a while. We just got federal funding recently to work on this. But the state hasn't yet defined really what multimodal level of service means. They have been charged with in Washington State Department of Transportation and Commerce together with developing guidance for how the state will approach multimodal level of service and recommendations then for how counties and cities can do the same. But that work is ongoing, and I would say not terribly far along to develop that guidance. And yet, these 2025 updates to the comp plans are supposed to include and be based on this multimodal level of service. So that'll be another area that will be kind of interesting to watch and will continue to evolve in our next update and the update after that, as we do the multimodal level of service work, which we too are just getting started on the work that we received federal funding to do for our region. And then also noteworthy is just in January of this year, the federal government adopted new performance measures for greenhouse gas emissions related to transportation. And then the state adopted state greenhouse gas emissions targets. And we, as an MPO, need to adopt our regional greenhouse gas emissions target by July 30th of 2024. And just as a teaser, you'll be hearing more about this in the future as we start to bring this particular performance target to you before July 30th, is that the state changed their target recently to make it more aggressive. And so the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction target is actually now a little more aggressive than what we have for the Thurston region. And so, yes.
Katrina has her hand up.
Katrina.
So we just heard this week that a lawsuit nixed the federal greenhouse gas emissions performance measure.
Oh,
we heard from WashDOT this week that we are no longer required to adopt a greenhouse gas emissions performance measure. Now that doesn't mean that we can't still do that, but there's no longer a federal requirement to do this.
Well, go on vacation and look what happens. Thank you, Katrina. I think that is actually probably good news for us, just to finish the thought, because the states is a little more aggressive in terms of reductions in the time frame than ours, and so there was a potential there for some inconsistency. And so hearing that news, I'm pretty certain our staff recommendation will be, let's stick with the greenhouse gas emissions targets that we already have. They're quite aggressive. And so then we'll see what happens at the federal level before. Thank you for that, Katrina. I did not hear that lawsuit was decided, which is big news. So there is a lot more to come in all of these areas. But again, just because there's going to be a lot to digest on this plan, we're bringing it to you in pieces. And this was that first piece. So I can answer any questions at this point.
Thank you so much, Mark. What questions do we have for Mark? Well, I'll go. I just think, oh, okay, Chris, I'll go. Oh, and okay, Chris and Danny, then me. So let's start with Chris.
You go first. Go ahead, Amy.
I just think this group is really uniquely positioned to connect the dots of reducing greenhouse gases stemming from transportation. It requires us to look at some of the policies that maybe we don't associate with transportation and their unintended consequences, like the presentation we had last month about affordability and how that's creating more rural development and putting more cars on the road and creating more greenhouse gas emissions. So when we're creating those policies that are making it more expensive to develop in urban areas, that unintended consequence is actually going directly in contrast to our goals. And then with industrial lands, you know, preserving land might seem on first blush like the best thing to do for the environment. But if that's forcing industrial buildings to be 11 miles from I-5 and creating truck traffic, the net loss for the environment with greenhouse gas emissions is actually might be worse. So as we're considering our role of threading the needle with all these different considerations, I just think that unintended consequences of policies that may not have a traditional nexus to transportation is something this group is uniquely positioned to look at. Chris?
Okay, I have sort of a utility focus. So besides transportation, just want to note, you know, on the update, which would come about either 2024, 2025, at the end of 2025, one of our biggest greenhouse emitters, the coal plant down in Centralia, Chehalis, will be closing down completely, as agreed to by the previous governor quite a while back. So it came in two phases. One was 2020 was shut down, and the second 600 megawatt facility. And that should improve our air quality quite a considerable amount.
Thanks, Chris. Danny?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to one thing in the presentation around something that you wanted feedback from us on in terms of using per capita VMT as a target. And I agree with that approach. And I'm wondering if you just talk like high level, like how we measure VMT, like how do we know how much an individual person is driving, you know, for their daily needs?
Yeah, so I'm smiling because this is another piece that is being hotly debated at this point. So how we currently do it is there's a federal database called the Highway Performance Management System. And in that, states report data to the federal government that then compiles this. And that is what we are currently using for vehicle miles traveled. There is a lot of debate about should we be using modeling instead of the HPMS, Highway Performance Management System data. And so currently, everyone that I've talked to at the other MPOs and RTPOs are hoping that the state will continue with the HPMS data unless there's some sort of really kind of clear standard protocol, because the problem is we all use different models. We all have different assumptions in our models. That can get really dicey really quick in terms of comparability to what different parts of the state are reporting. And so right now that is based on federal data that we pull from this Highway Performance Management System.
Let's go to Hillary.
Yeah, thanks. This is actually kind of a little bit of a piggyback on what you were sharing, Amy. And I think that like we I 100% agree. And I think we as members of this body and also as electeds have an obligation to have those hard conversations with community members. So I was thinking so much about what you said when we were talking about the industrial lands piece, and like, what is the likelihood that if those developments happen along I-5, we'll hear from constituents who are unhappy about, I don't want to look at those while I'm driving on the freeway, or why is this, beautiful bucolic rural area being destroyed? And I think that like we have an obligation to tell that story of like how that system all connects together. And this is a little bit of, because Mark, I know you come out and do presentations to our governing bodies, which are so appreciated and really helpful, at least for my members, because I can share with them what we're talking about in these meetings, but I think it's much more, it sticks with them more when you come out and meet with us. But I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to think about as a body collectively developing some messaging that we can be making sure that we're integrating into the way that we communicate with community members. I mean, y'all know that we're going through really hard conversations in our school district about where families are living, who is having children, how we're organizing those folks into learning communities. And a huge part of that is impacted by the livability and the planning in our county and in our school district in particular. And I think that knowing how all of those pieces talk together to build that sustainable environment that can welcome more and more residents in the face of climate change is so critical. So this is just kind of a little, not asking you all to do more work, Mark, but also thinking about what can we do sort of ad hoc to help support each other in that dialogue. So if anybody's interested in that conversation, I would be interested in getting a cup of coffee and talking more about that. So hit me up.
Well, and I'm sorry.
No, go Mark.
Well, I'll also just say that, I mean, that is the planning directors. We all meet monthly for kind of an informal breakfast and talk about issues. And this is one we've been talking about a lot, because one of the things that you said, Chair Harding, is about these potential conflicts. There are conflicts. There have been so many changes to the Growth Management Act and in other areas. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that we don't know yet how those all fit together and what some of those unintended consequences will be in terms of, can we develop in the way that it asks us to do it over here and still meet the requirements that it asks us to do over here? And so I think that is something we've been talking a lot about with the planning directors. And so some of that, I think we're going to need our jurisdictions to get a little further into these comp plan updates to really suss out where those potential conflicts are and how we talk about them. But I completely agree that there are going to be things that that have great intention, and there's going to be some unintended indirect sorts of impacts of those that then we're going to have to wrestle with. And getting messaging on that will be a priority.
I totally agree. And I think that political courage is really necessary, because when you're advocating for one population or one issue, it's really easy to have a strong opinion as to what should or should not be happening. And as Hillary alluded to with school consolidation, or everyone here is looking at things from a broader lens, because you're balancing all of these different things. And so having support from the larger group of elected officials to have political courage to make those hard decisions where nobody's happy, because you balance the interest of all of our broader communities. So I'm here for it too, Hillary. So I think if anyone needs messaging or a hug or whatever you need, knowing that this is challenging work, and it requires us to really look beyond the sound bites, and what sounds good isn't always the full story. So anything else on that from anyone? Okay, we will move on to Executive Director report.
Yeah, I do have a few things. So one, we brought you the final findings on the high capacity transportation study. So this was looking at at expanding the express bus service up north, increasing van pools, the potential for commuter rail, the potential for light rail. And the findings of that are done. We've got now a lot of outreach to do on this. And so we've created a high capacity transportation page on our website. We've also got a really good one pager on the findings of that work that will include Berlina. Let's include that in the after meeting summary, that one pager, because I think that's really useful. And so also on that web page, there is an opportunity for people to provide feedback. And so we'll be looking to advertise that opportunity to provide feedback on what we've heard, because that is one of the things that I get asked about the most. And so getting the word out on kind of where we're at and what's feasible in what time frame, it will be really important in relation to that. Also, one of the council subcommittees, again, that I talked about in February when I went through the orientation, is the Urban Growth Management Subcommittee. And that is a group that was created by and called out in our countywide planning policies as being under TRPC. And the primary responsibility of that subcommittee that meets when there is a need, it's not meeting all the time, when there are needed changes to the countywide planning policies, or when there are proposals to adjust the urban growth boundaries of some of our cities. And we will be looking to convene that group again to look at some changes to the countywide planning policies. And this is to account for recent state legislative changes. And so the two pieces that we'll be talking about with the subcommittee is tribal consultation and the kind of no net change land swaps that we talked about being passed this session, accounting for that in our countywide planning policies. And so we'll be contacting the jurisdiction soon, because we've had some changes with the elections and such of some of who was on the Urban Growth Management Subcommittee when we convened it last year. And so we'll be contacting the jurisdictions to make sure we have the right membership, and we're looking for to convene that meeting coming up here soon. And then lastly, just a plug that you all have received the opportunity to provide feedback on my performance. My evaluation is ongoing. I really value getting the feedback on how I'm doing in serving our staff and serving all of you and our members. And so your due date for providing that feedback is April 16th and would be much appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. And, no news is good news sometimes, but taking the time, even if you think Mark's doing a stand-up job, just to jot that down, it doesn't take very long. So that really helps him have a full picture of feedback of what can get better and what's going great. So we are now on to report from outside committee assignments. Chris, do you have any comments today?
Briefly, I covered the meeting yesterday, and that's why I brought up House Bill 1181, because we talked for a long time about Lakewood's plan and Sammamish and King County's climate resiliency and reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. It was interesting how they talked towards involving youth, specifically high school students in Sammamish, who were engaged early. One of the questions put to them was how they got them and how they vetted them. And apparently they have some sustainability and resiliency group meetings happening that involve students. And so they were sort of pre-vetted through that process before they started getting engaged in these specific programs, to work on climate for the cities. And one of the impacts of that was that they ended up running the meetings, which I thought was interesting that they took the lead on it and were well appreciated for doing so. The first talk was given by PSE on community solar projects, and their report was basically telling people the need for transmission and projects need to be close to conduits and things that their facilities can provide connectivity, because you're sending power out, not receiving it in. And also the orientation, simple things about solar that make a project effective. And that was pretty much it, besides describing what Lakewood and Sammamish were doing. So thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Chris? Okay, thanks, Chris. Member check-in. Does anyone have anything exciting to share with the group? Carolina.
Thank you. Just a reminder that we do have an open house today for a meet and greet with our new county manager, Leonard Hernandez. He started this week, and it's going to be at the atrium at 3000 Pacific Avenue from 4:30 to 5:30. So hope to see you there.
Awesome. Thank you. What else cool stuff is going on out there in the world? Lots, I'm sure. Okay, with that, just a reminder that you are all doing difficult and really meaningful work. And some days you're the windshield and some days you're the bug, but it really does make a difference in the community. And thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Mark and team, for making these meetings so smooth. And we will see everyone. Our next meeting will be May 3rd, remote. And as of 10:42, we're adjourned.
Non-debatable motion. Y'all have a good day.